The morning sun broke through the clouds over London on May 6, 2023, casting a golden glow across Westminster Abbey. Inside Kensington Palace, the Wales family was preparing for one of the most significant days in British history. William stood before the mirror, adjusting his ceremonial robes while Kate helped their youngest son, Louis, with his miniature royal uniform. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just any royal event. King Charles III was about to be crowned, and the entire world would be watching. For William, this meant supporting his father during this historic transition. For Kate, it meant presenting their children to billions of viewers while ensuring they remained comfortable throughout the lengthy ceremony. 9-year-old George understood the weight of the day. As second in line to the throne, he had been given a special role as one of the pages of honor. His small shoulders carried not just ceremonial robes but the expectations of a nation. Kate knelt beside him, straightening his collar, her gentle touch a reminder that despite all the grandeur, he was still her little boy. Charlotte, 8 years old, possessed a natural grace that often surprised royal watchers. She had been preparing for weeks, practicing her curtsy and learning the proper way to sit during the long ceremony. Her mother had taught her that being royal wasn't about being perfect, but about being present and respectful. The young princess took these lessons to heart, determined to make her family proud. Then there was Louis, the 5-year-old wild card. His cherubic face and unpredictable nature had already made him a favorite among royal watchers. Kate exchanged knowing glances with William. They both understood that Louis might steal the show for better or worse, but they had agreed not to pressure him. He was, after all, still very much a child. The palace staff moved efficiently around them, making final adjustments to outfits and coordinating timing. Royal protection officers spoke quietly into their communication devices, ensuring every security measure was in place. The weight of history pressed down on everyone present, yet William and Kate worked hard to keep things light for their children. Kate had chosen a stunning ivory silk gown by Alexander McQueen, paired with a formal robe and a striking silver headpiece. The outfit was elegant but not overshadowing. She knew this day belonged to Charles, and she was determined to support him while guiding her children through their roles. Her own nerves were carefully hidden beneath a calm exterior that had taken years to perfect. William found himself thinking about his late mother, Diana. She would have loved this moment, seeing her grandchildren participate in such a momentous occasion. He felt her absence keenly, but also sensed her presence in the way Kate mothered their children, balancing duty with warmth, tradition with innovation. The car journey to Westminster Abbey was quiet. George stared out the window at the crowds already lining the streets. Charlotte held her mother's hand, her small fingers occasionally squeezing when the noise of the crowd grew loud. Louis bounced in his seat, his energy barely contained, pointing at the decorations and asking endless questions. Kate answered each query patiently, using the moment to teach rather than scold. She explained the significance of the coronation, why so many people had come to watch, and what role each member of the family would play. Her voice remained steady and warm, an anchor of calm in the building excitement. As their vehicle approached the Abbey, the crowd's roar intensified. Thousands of people had camped overnight for a glimpse of the royal family. Flags waved, cameras flashed, and the air vibrated with excitement. William felt the familiar weight of public duty settling on his shoulders, but when he looked at Kate, her confident smile reminded him they were in this together. The children pressed against the windows, marveling at the sea of faces. For George, this was another step in his lifelong preparation for kingship. For Charlotte, it was a chance to be part of something bigger than herself. For Louis, it was simply an adventure, though he didn't fully grasp its significance. Inside Westminster Abbey, 2,000 guests had already taken their seats. World leaders, foreign royals, and distinguished citizens from across the Commonwealth filled the ancient church. The air hummed with whispered conversations and the rustle of formal attire. Television cameras positioned throughout the space would broadcast every moment to an estimated 2 billion viewers worldwide. The Abbey itself had been transformed. Flowers adorned every available surface, their scent mingling with the smell of old stone and centuries of history. The coronation chair, which had seated monarchs since 1308, stood ready for its newest occupant. Every detail had been planned with precision, blending ancient tradition with modern sensibilities. William helped his children from the car, his hand firm but gentle on George's shoulder. The boy's face was pale but determined. Kate smoothed Charlotte's dress one final time, then took Louis's hand firmly. The youngest prince had already started to fidget, and the ceremony hadn't even begun. They walked toward the abbey entrance, their footsteps echoing on the ancient stones. This was the moment they had prepared for, the culmination of weeks of planning and centuries of tradition. As they crossed the threshold, the magnificent organ began to play, its notes filling the vast space with sound that seemed to come from heaven itself. The family took their designated seats, William and Kate positioning themselves to easily monitor all three children. George would soon be called forward for his special duties. Charlotte sat perfectly still, her posture impeccable. Louis looked around with wide eyes, taking in the grandeur that surrounded him on all sides. Kate exchanged one more glance with William. Whatever happened next, they would face it together as a family. The ceremony was about to begin, and the world was watching. The moment arrived when George was called forward to join the other pages of honor. Kate felt her heart clench as her eldest son stood, smoothing down his scarlet and gold uniform. He looked so small yet so dignified as he walked toward his position. William reached over and squeezed her hand, both of them holding their breath as their son took his place in history. George's role was to carry the hem of his grandfather's robes during the ceremony. It was a position of great honor, one that required focus and grace. The young prince had practiced repeatedly, but practicing in a palace room was vastly different from performing in front of the world's eyes. As he took his position, cameras zoomed in on his serious expression, capturing the determination in his young face. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony with words that had echoed through this same space for over 1,000 years. His voice carried across the abbey, rich with meaning and tradition. King Charles sat in the coronation chair, his face composed but his eyes revealing the emotion of the moment. This was the culmination of a lifetime of waiting, of preparation, of service. Charlotte watched her brother intently from her seat. Her small hands were folded in her lap, exactly as her mother had taught her. She understood that George had an important job to do, and she wanted to support him with her good behavior. Every few minutes she glanced at Kate, seeking reassurance, finding it in her mother's calm presence. Louis, however, was beginning to struggle. The 5-year-old had been sitting still for what felt like forever to his young mind. He shifted in his seat, swung his legs, and looked around with increasing restlessness. Kate placed a gentle hand on his knee, a silent reminder to settle. He tried, he really did, but stillness was not in his nature. The ceremony progressed through its ancient stages. The anointing, the investiture, the crowning. Each moment was heavy with symbolism, connecting this day to countless coronations that had come before. The congregation sang hymns that had been sung at every coronation since medieval times. The organ's music swelled, filling every corner of the historic building. George performed his duties flawlessly. When it came time to move with the robes, he stepped carefully, his young face focused with intense concentration. William felt pride surge through him. His son was managing the pressure beautifully, representing their family and the future of the monarchy with dignity beyond his years. Kate's eyes never left her children. She had positioned herself strategically so she could see all three. George was handling his role perfectly. Charlotte remained the picture of royal composure. But Louis was reaching his limit. She could see it in the way he was starting to pull at his collar, the way his attention wandered more frequently. The young prince began to yawn. Then he yawned again. Television cameras caught every moment, and social media immediately lit up with comments about the adorable child who was clearly bored with the lengthy ceremony. Louis rubbed his eyes, leaned against his mother, then sat up straight again when she gently encouraged him. Then came the moment that would define the day. As a particularly solemn part of the ceremony began, Louis covered his face with his hands and peeked through his fingers at the proceedings. The gesture was so natural, so childlike, that it broke through the formality of the occasion. He was simply a 5-year-old boy trying to cope with a very long, very boring grown-up event. Kate leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Whatever she said made him sit up a bit straighter, but within moments he was fidgeting again. He picked at the braiding on his uniform, examined his shoes with intense interest, and at one point appeared to be counting the decorations on the ceiling. Charlotte, sensing her brother's restlessness, reached over and took his hand. The gesture was sweet and sisterly, an attempt to help him through the difficult moment. Louis accepted the comfort, squeezing her hand back. But it only helped for a few minutes before his attention wandered again. William noticed that several cameras had now focused primarily on Louis, rather than on the ceremony itself. He felt a mix of emotions, understanding that his youngest son was simply being age-appropriate while also aware that these moments were being broadcast worldwide. But he and Kate had agreed they wouldn't suppress their children's natural behavior entirely. As the ceremony reached its most sacred moments, Louis let out another massive yawn. This one caught him by surprise, his little mouth opening wide, his whole face scrunching up with the effort. Some of the nearby guests couldn't help but smile. The child's honest reaction to the lengthy ceremony was refreshing in its authenticity. Kate handed Louis a small program, hoping it would give him something to occupy his hands. He looked at it briefly, flipped through the pages, then set it aside. He leaned against his mother again, his energy clearly depleted. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close, choosing comfort over strict protocol in that moment. The cameras captured it all. Kate's gentle mothering, Charlotte's perfect behavior, George's serious dedication to his duties, and Louis's charmingly human struggle with boredom. These weren't distant, untouchable royals. They were a real family, managing a significant public event while trying to help their youngest child through a challenging situation. George, meanwhile, continued to excel in his role. When it came time to move with the newly crowned king, he executed his duties with precision. His grandfather glanced down at him at one point, offering a subtle smile of encouragement. The moment was brief but meaningful, a connection between generations captured forever on film. The coronation crown was placed on Charles's head, and the abbey erupted in cries of acknowledgement. The ancient words rang out, proclaiming a new monarch. Louis perked up at the sudden noise and excitement, briefly engaged by the dramatic moment. But as things settled back into quieter ceremony, his interest faded once more. Kate saw other parents in the congregation watching her handle Louis, some with sympathy, others with understanding smiles. Every parent knew the challenge of keeping a young child still during a long event. The difference was that she had to do it while billions watched and judged, yet she remained patient, never sharp or harsh with him. As the ceremony continued toward its conclusion, William glanced at his family. George stood tall in his ceremonial role. Charlotte sat with remarkable poise. Louis struggled but persevered with his mother's support. And Kate managed it all with grace and warmth. In that moment, he realized that this image, this real and honest portrait of royal family life, was perhaps the most powerful message they could send to the world. The ceremony finally drew to a close after more than 2 hours. The newly crowned King Charles and Queen Camilla began their procession out of Westminster Abbey, followed by members of the royal family in careful order. George rejoined his parents and siblings, his face flushed with relief and pride at having completed his duties successfully. Kate immediately wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close for a brief moment. She whispered words of praise in his ear, and his face lit up with a smile. The pressure had been immense for such a young boy, but he had risen to the occasion beautifully. William ruffled his son's hair affectionately, breaking protocol for just a moment to be a proud father. Charlotte stood to join the procession, her posture still perfect despite the long ceremony. She had watched everything with keen interest, absorbing the pageantry and tradition. Louis, finally released from the requirement to sit still, bounced to his feet with renewed energy. The prospect of movement and fresh air had revived his spirits considerably. The family walked out of the abbey into bright daylight. The crowd's roar was deafening as they emerged. Thousands of people pressed against barriers, waving flags and cheering for the royal family. The children blinked in the sudden brightness, their eyes adjusting after the dim interior of the ancient church. They climbed into the ornate carriage that would take them back to Buckingham Palace. Louis immediately pressed his face against the window, waving enthusiastically at the crowds. His earlier boredom was completely forgotten now that there was action and excitement. Charlotte waved more sedately, her movements graceful and controlled. George sat between his parents, still processing everything that had just happened. The procession moved slowly through the streets of London. Military bands played stirring music. Horse guards in ceremonial dress flanked the carriages. Overhead, the Royal Air Force prepared for a flyover. Every detail had been choreographed to perfection, a display of British pageantry at its finest. Kate watched her children's reactions to the crowd. This was their lives, she reminded herself. This extraordinary experience would be part of their normal. Yet she and William worked hard to ensure they remained grounded, that they understood both their privilege and their responsibility. Days like this made that balance particularly challenging. William pointed out various landmarks to the children as they passed. He told them stories about previous coronations, about the history embedded in every street they traveled. Even Louis listened, captivated by his father's storytelling. These moments of connection were precious, sandwiched between public duties and royal obligations. As they approached Buckingham Palace, anticipation built. The traditional balcony appearance would be the final major moment of the day. Millions would watch as the newly crowned king and his family greeted the nation from that famous balcony. For the children, it would be another test of their ability to manage public attention. Inside the palace, there was a brief respite. The children were given drinks and snacks, a chance to stretch and move around. Louis ran down a hallway, burning off pent-up energy. Charlotte carefully removed her headpiece, relieved to be free of its weight. George sat quietly, still wearing his ceremonial outfit, not quite ready to let go of the day's significance. Kate touched up her appearance while keeping one eye on the children. She could see Louis's energy returning to potentially troublesome levels. The balcony appearance would be shorter than the ceremony, but it would require them to stand still while facing the massive crowd gathered in front of the palace. She knelt beside Louis, speaking to him seriously about what was expected. The young prince nodded, promising to be good, but Kate knew that promises from a 5-year-old could only go so far. She caught William's eye and they shared a knowing look. Whatever happened on that balcony, they would handle it together. Their priority was supporting the king while also protecting their children's well-being. The call came to assemble. King Charles and Queen Camilla would lead the way onto the balcony, followed by working members of the royal family. William took Charlotte's hand. Kate held Louis firmly. George walked beside his father, his earlier confidence returning now that his ceremonial duties were complete. They stepped through the palace doors onto the famous balcony. The sound that greeted them was overwhelming. A sea of people stretched as far as the eye could see, filling the mall and spilling into surrounding streets. Flags waved in waves of red, white, and blue. The cheering was so loud it was almost physical, pressing against them with its intensity. Louis's eyes went wide. He had never experienced anything quite like this. The sheer number of people, all there to see his grandfather and his family, was beyond his young comprehension. He gripped his mother's hand tighter, suddenly unsure in the face of such overwhelming attention. Kate felt his uncertainty and pulled him slightly behind her, giving him a moment to adjust. She waved to the crowd with her free hand, her smile bright and genuine. William did the same, holding Charlotte's hand as she offered her own perfect royal wave. George stood tall beside his father, copying his movements, learning with every moment how to be a future king. Then the Royal Air Force appeared overhead. The red arrows flew in formation, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke across the sky. The sight was spectacular, a perfect finale to the day's celebrations. The crowd's cheering somehow grew even louder, if that was possible. Louis stepped forward, his attention captured by the planes. He pointed up at them, his face full of wonder and excitement. The cameras caught his delighted expression, his childlike joy at the aerial display. He began to jump and wave, his enthusiasm completely uncontained. Kate let him have the moment. After hours of trying to control his natural exuberance, she allowed him this release. William smiled at his youngest son's antics, understanding that these genuine reactions were what made people connect with their family. Perfect behavior was less relatable than honest emotion. Charlotte stood between her brothers, still composed but now with a smile on her face. The planes had broken through her careful control as well, reminding her that she was still just a child enjoying an extraordinary spectacle. She squeezed George's hand and he squeezed back, the two of them sharing this incredible experience. The family stood on the balcony for several more minutes, waving to the crowd, watching the planes circle back for another pass. Louis continued to point and jump, his energy infectious. Even some of the other adults on the balcony couldn't help but smile at his excitement. Finally, it was time to withdraw. King Charles led the family back inside, and the crowd's cheering followed them until the doors closed. Inside, the formal atmosphere relaxed slightly. Louis immediately started talking about the planes, his words tumbling over each other in his rush to express his excitement. Kate scooped him up, spinning him around once, letting him laugh freely. George and Charlotte crowded close, all of them talking about what they had seen and experienced. For just a moment, they weren't royal princes and princess. They were simply children processing an amazing day with their parents. Within minutes of the balcony appearance ending, images and videos of the Wales children flooded social media. Louis's animated reactions, Charlotte's perfect poise, and George's serious dedication to his duties captured hearts across the globe. News outlets from Tokyo to Toronto featured the children on their front pages, their innocence and authenticity cutting through the ceremony's formality. In living rooms across Britain, families gathered around televisions discussed what they had witnessed. Parents related to Kate's patient handling of Louis's fidgeting. Grandparents marveled at George's maturity. Young girls saw themselves in Charlotte's grace. The children had humanized the monarchy in a way that speeches and official statements never could. Back at Buckingham Palace, William and Kate finally had a moment to check the news coverage on their phones. Royal aides had been monitoring social media throughout the day, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Rather than criticism for Louis's behavior, people praised Kate's gentle parenting and the family's obvious warmth. One video clip in particular had gone viral. It showed the moment when Louis covered his face with his hands during the ceremony, peeking through his fingers with an expression of pure childhood impatience. The clip had been viewed millions of times, shared with captions like, "All of us during long meetings," and "The most relatable royal ever." Kate watched the clip with mixed feelings. She was glad people found it endearing, but she also worried about the pressure such attention placed on her youngest son. He was still so small, still learning who he was, and now millions of people felt they knew him based on a few moments caught on camera. William understood her concern. He had grown up under intense media scrutiny, knowing that every childhood mistake or awkward moment would be dissected and analyzed. But he also recognized that times had changed. Social media allowed for immediate, direct connection between the royal family and the public. Louis's genuine reactions had done more to modernize the monarchy's image than any carefully crafted PR campaign could achieve. Charlotte had been watching the coverage too. Curled up on a sofa in one of the palace's private rooms, she saw herself on the screen sitting so properly and felt a surge of pride. She had done what was expected of her, supported her family through an important day, but she also noticed how much attention her younger brother was receiving, and a small part of her wondered if being perfect was less interesting than being real. George, now changed out of his ceremonial robes, sat with his grandfather. King Charles wanted to thank him personally for his role in the ceremony. The newly crowned monarch looked at his grandson with deep affection, seeing in him echoes of his own childhood, of duty learned young, of responsibility carried before it should have been necessary. The king spoke to George about the importance of what they had done that day. He explained that ceremonies like the coronation weren't just about crowns and robes. They were about continuity, about connecting past and future, about showing the nation that the monarchy would endure through generations. George listened seriously, beginning to understand the weight of his future role. Meanwhile, international news channels were running special segments analyzing the family dynamics they had witnessed. Royal experts dissected every interaction, every gesture. Most agreed that William and Kate were successfully balancing royal duty with modern parenting, allowing their children to be genuine while still teaching them appropriate behavior. One commentator noted how Kate had handled Louis with remarkable patience, never once appearing frustrated or embarrassed by his restlessness. Another pointed out that George's successful completion of his duties suggested excellent preparation and support from his parents. The consensus was that the Wales family represented a new, more accessible face of royalty. Back in their private quarters that evening, the family gathered for a quiet dinner. The children were exhausted but still buzzing with the day's excitement. Louis had finally crashed, falling asleep on a sofa before dinner was even served. William carried him to bed, his small son's face peaceful in sleep, unaware of the international attention he had garnered. At the dinner table, Charlotte asked her parents about some of the things she had overheard adults discussing. She wanted to know why people cared so much about what they wore, how they behaved, why their family was so important to strangers. Kate and William took turns explaining, trying to give age-appropriate answers that would help her understand without overwhelming her. George was quieter than usual, processing the day's events. He had known his role was important, but standing in Westminster Abbey carrying his grandfather's robes while the world watched had made it real in a way that practice sessions never could. He asked his father how he managed the pressure of public attention, of knowing every action was scrutinized. William was honest with him. He explained that it was sometimes difficult, that there were days when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But he also talked about the privilege of service, about the opportunity they had to make positive differences in people's lives. He told George that having family support, especially from his mother and siblings, made everything bearable. Later that night, Kate checked on each of the children before going to bed herself. Charlotte was already asleep, her coronation outfit carefully hung up, her face serene. Louis hadn't moved since William put him down, completely exhausted from the long day. George was still awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind clearly working through everything that had happened. Kate sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his hair gently. She told him how proud she was, how beautifully he had handled his responsibilities. But she also reminded him that he was still her little boy, that it was okay to feel overwhelmed, that he didn't have to be perfect. George finally relaxed, his eyes growing heavy, comforted by her presence and words. As Kate returned to her own room, she reflected on the day. They had navigated it successfully, she thought. The children had shown the world that young royals could be both dutiful and genuine, formal and relatable. George had demonstrated the dignity expected of a future king. Charlotte had displayed grace beyond her years. And Louis had reminded everyone that children should be allowed to be children, even in the most formal circumstances. William was already in bed, scrolling through more news coverage. He showed Kate a particularly touching article written by a single mother about how she related to Kate's gentle handling of Louis's behavior. The woman wrote about the relief she felt seeing even a princess struggle with an energetic child during an important event, how it made her feel less alone in her own parenting challenges. This, Kate realized, was the real impact of the day, not the ceremony itself, beautiful as it had been, but these moments of human connection. By allowing their children to be themselves, by showing patience and warmth rather than rigid control, they had bridged the gap between royal family and regular families. They had shown that despite the crowns and palaces, they too dealt with the same challenges all parents face. Social media continued to buzz throughout the night. Memes were created, mostly affectionate and humorous. Fan accounts dedicated to the children gained thousands of new followers. News articles were written analyzing every aspect of their appearance and behavior. The coronation of King Charles III would be remembered, but for many people, the most memorable images would be of 3 children navigating an extraordinary day with courage, grace, and delightful humanity. The days following the coronation brought continued attention to the Wales family. Major newspapers ran feature stories exploring how William and Kate were raising the next generation of royals. Parenting experts weighed in on their approach, generally praising their balance of discipline and warmth. The children's natural behavior at the coronation became a case study in authentic public presentation. Kate found herself in an unusual position. She had always been conscious of public perception, careful about how their family was portrayed. But the overwhelmingly positive response to the children's genuine behavior, particularly Louis's unfiltered reactions, made her reconsider her approach. Perhaps, she thought, trying to present a perfect image was less valuable than showing their real family dynamics. William discussed this with her over morning coffee while the children were at school. He shared his own childhood experiences of being constantly told to suppress natural reactions, to always appear composed regardless of his actual feelings. It had created a distance between his public and private selves that took years to reconcile. He didn't want that for their children. They agreed on a new approach. While the children would still be taught appropriate behavior for different situations, they wouldn't be expected to be small adults. George would be supported in his royal duties but also protected from excessive pressure. Charlotte would be encouraged to maintain her natural poise without feeling it was her only value, and Louis would be allowed to be energetic and spontaneous with guidance rather than suppression. The decision represented a shift in royal child-rearing philosophy. Previous generations had emphasized duty and decorum above all else. William and Kate were pioneering a middle path, acknowledging their children's royal roles while prioritizing their emotional well-being. It was a gamble, but the coronation had shown them that the public responded positively to authenticity. Meanwhile, the children were processing their own experiences of the day. George returned to school to find himself something of a celebrity among his classmates. Teachers handled it carefully, not wanting him to feel either isolated or overly special. But the other students were naturally curious about what it felt like to be part of such a historic event. George found it strange to be questioned about things that felt normal to him. Yes, his grandfather was now king, but he was also just grandpa. Yes, he had carried ceremonial robes in Westminster Abbey, but he had also dropped his water bottle before the ceremony and worried about tripping. The grand and the ordinary existed together in his life, and he was learning to navigate both. Charlotte faced similar attention at her school. Girls wanted to know about her dress, her headpiece, what it felt like to be a real princess at a coronation. She answered their questions politely but found herself wanting to talk about other things. She loved ballet and gymnastics and art. Being a princess was just one part of who she was, and she wanted her friends to see her completely. Louis, too young to fully understand the attention he had generated, simply returned to his normal routine. His teachers had seen the coverage, of course, and found it endearing. They had dealt with his energetic nature many times and weren't surprised that he had struggled to sit still during a long ceremony. They continued to work with him on focus and patience, understanding that growth would come with time and maturity. At home, the family tried to maintain their routines as much as possible. Dinner together most nights. Homework help. Bedtime stories. Kate was adamant that despite their public roles, the children needed a stable, nurturing home environment. The palace could wait. Right now they were just mom and dad helping their kids with reading and math, but the coronation's impact continued to ripple outward. Palace advisors noticed a significant uptick in positive sentiment toward the monarchy, particularly among younger demographics. The Wales family's relatability had brought fresh interest from people who might otherwise have been indifferent or even hostile to the royal institution. Marketing experts analyzed the phenomenon. They noted that in an age of carefully curated social media personas, genuine human moments stood out dramatically. Louis's fidgeting, Kate's patient mothering, George's nervous dedication, these weren't staged or scripted. They were real family dynamics playing out in an extraordinary setting, and people craved that authenticity. The monarchy's press office carefully considered how to build on this momentum without exploiting it. They didn't want to turn the children into marketing tools, but they also recognized that controlled glimpses of family life could help maintain public support. It was a delicate balance that required constant recalibration. William had long conversations with his father about this challenge. King Charles understood better than most the burden of growing up in the public eye. He had chafed against the restrictions of his own childhood, yet recognized that some boundaries were necessary for the children's protection. Together, they worked to establish guidelines that would protect the children while acknowledging public interest. One key decision was to limit the children's public appearances to significant events. They wouldn't be trotted out for every royal engagement or photo opportunity. Instead, their appearances would be meaningful, tied to real family occasions or events appropriate for their ages. This would help preserve some normalcy in their lives while still fulfilling their royal roles. Kate appreciated this approach. She had seen how media attention could distort childhood, creating pressure and anxiety. She wanted her children to have space to make mistakes, to be silly, to explore who they were without constant scrutiny. The coronation would be a major public appearance, not the template for their daily lives. The international response to the family continued to fascinate observers. In countries without monarchies, people expressed surprise at their own interest in these British royal children. There was something universal in the family dynamics they displayed, transcending cultural and political boundaries. Parents everywhere related to the challenge of managing children in important situations. Several weeks after the coronation, a major American network requested an interview with William and Kate to discuss modern royal parenting. After careful consideration, they declined. They felt that analyzing their parenting approach would create artificial pressure, turning natural family dynamics into a self-conscious performance. They would continue to parent as they thought best, letting their actions speak for themselves. Instead, they focused on their charitable work, using their platform to highlight causes they cared about. They wanted their children to understand that privilege came with responsibility, that their royal status was meaningful only if used in service to others. This was the lesson they hoped would define their children's understanding of what it meant to be royal. George, in particular, was beginning to grasp this concept. At 9 years old, he asked thoughtful questions about why some people had so much while others struggled. William and Kate answered honestly, introducing him to their charitable work age-appropriately. They took him to visit organizations they supported, showing him how their family could make positive differences. Charlotte showed similar awareness, though expressed differently. She wanted to know about children in other countries, what their lives were like, whether they were happy. Kate used these questions as teaching moments, helping her daughter develop empathy and global awareness. They looked at maps together, read age-appropriate books about different cultures, and discussed how they could help. Even Louis, young as he was, began to understand that his family was different in some ways. When he asked why people took so many pictures of them, Kate explained simply that Daddy and Grandpa had important jobs helping the country, and people were interested in their family. Louis accepted this explanation without fully understanding, but it was a start. As the months passed after the coronation, the family found their rhythm again. The intense attention faded to more manageable levels. They could walk in the park, attend school events, live their lives with some semblance of normalcy. But the coronation remained a defining moment, a day when they had shown the world who they were as a family, and the world had embraced them for it. A year after the coronation, the Wales family found themselves reflecting on how that single day had changed their lives. The immediate frenzy of attention had subsided, but the subtle shifts in their public roles and private understandings continued to evolve. The children were growing, learning, becoming more aware of their unique positions in the world. George had matured noticeably. Now 10 years old, he carried himself with increasing confidence born from successfully navigating his role at the coronation. Teachers noticed he had become more comfortable speaking in front of groups, more willing to take on leadership roles in school projects. The experience of performing duties under intense pressure had given him a foundation of self-assurance. Yet William and Kate watched carefully for signs of excessive burden. They knew the dangers of placing too much responsibility on young shoulders. Regular conversations checked in on how George felt about his future role. They assured him that childhood should be enjoyed, that kingship was decades away, that right now his job was simply to learn and grow. George appreciated these assurances, though part of him had accepted his destiny with a gravity unusual for his age. He had dreams like other boys, wanting to be a pilot or a conservationist, but underneath ran a current of understanding that his path was already largely determined. His parents' challenge was helping him embrace that path without feeling trapped by it. Charlotte, now 9, had developed a fascinating blend of public grace and private mischief. At formal events, she remained poised and proper, having internalized the lessons of appropriate royal behavior. But at home, she was wonderfully silly, making her brothers laugh with impressions and jokes. This ability to shift between modes served her well, allowing her to fulfill expectations without losing herself. Kate saw so much of herself in Charlotte. She too had learned to navigate the divide between public presentation and private personality. She made sure Charlotte knew that both versions were equally valid, that being proper in public didn't mean suppressing her authentic self. It was a delicate balance, one Kate continued to refine in her own life. Louis, at 6, remained delightfully unpredictable. The coronation had been his first major public event, and while he had struggled with the long ceremony, he had also shown the world his vibrant personality. His parents chose to protect him from excessive exposure, limiting his public appearances while he was still so young and unfiltered. The viral moments from the coronation followed Louis in amusing ways. Occasionally, someone would recognize him in public and smile, remembering his yawns and fidgets. Most people were kind about it, seeing it as endearing rather than inappropriate. But William and Kate remained vigilant, not wanting their son to feel defined by those moments or pressured to perform for public entertainment. The family's approach to royal life had indeed shifted after the coronation. They were more willing to show genuine emotion in public, less concerned with presenting a perfect facade. When Charlotte fell and scraped her knee at a public event, Kate comforted her openly rather than rushing her away from cameras. When George looked nervous before a speech, William's supportive hand on his shoulder was visible to all. These small moments of authentic family interaction resonated deeply with the public. People saw themselves reflected in the Wales family's experiences. The distance between royalty and regular citizens seemed to shrink, not through diminishing the monarchy's significance, but through emphasizing shared human experiences. Palace officials noted the shift with mixed feelings. Traditional courtiers worried about dignity and mystique being eroded, but younger advisors recognized that in the modern era, relatability was crucial to relevance. The monarchy needed to evolve to survive, and the Wales family was leading that evolution naturally, without forced modernization. King Charles watched his grandchildren's development with deep interest. He saw in William's parenting approach a gentler version of the royal upbringing he had experienced. He appreciated how William and Kate balanced duty with warmth, preparing the children for their roles while protecting their childhoods. It was a balance he wished his own parents had struck more successfully. The king made efforts to be more present in his grandchildren's lives than his schedule typically allowed. He would call George to discuss history or current events, treating him as a young person with valuable perspectives rather than just a child. He sent Charlotte books about strong women leaders throughout history. He played energetic games with Louis, enjoying the boy's infectious enthusiasm. These relationships were being documented carefully but consistently by the palace's official photographers. Not for immediate release, but for the historical record. Future generations would see not just ceremonial moments, but genuine family connections. Grandparents and grandchildren sharing love across the formality of their positions. The coronation photos themselves had taken on iconic status. The image of George in his page of honor uniform, his young face serious with concentration, appeared in history books and documentaries. Charlotte's perfect curtsy became a teaching moment in etiquette classes, and Louis's peek-through-fingers moment was endlessly recreated in memes and parodies. Always affectionate in tone, Kate sometimes worried about how these frozen moments might affect her children's self-perception. Would George feel pressured to always be serious? Would Charlotte think perfection was her only value? Would Louis be forever seen as the cheeky youngest? She and William worked consciously to reinforce that they loved their children for who they were, not for their public performances. The family's private conversations often touched on these themes. During a summer holiday at Balmoral, away from London's intensity, they had long discussions about identity and duty. George asked difficult questions about fairness, about why he was born into such privilege while others struggled. William and Kate didn't shy away from these questions, using them as opportunities to instill values of service and responsibility. Charlotte wondered aloud whether she would ever be as important as her brothers. Kate was quick to affirm her daughter's value, explaining that being royal wasn't about importance but about service, and that her contributions would be just as meaningful as George's, just different in form. She spoke about Princess Anne, showing Charlotte examples of how female royals created significant legacies. Louis, still young, mostly wanted to know when they could go swimming or play football. His parents cherished his innocence, knowing it wouldn't last forever. Soon enough, he too would begin to understand the complexities of their family's position. For now, they let him be simply a child, energetic and joyful and unencumbered by expectation. As the anniversary of the coronation approached, media outlets began planning retrospective pieces. They would analyze the ceremony, the fashion, the music, and inevitably the children's roles. The Wales family prepared the children for renewed attention, explaining that people would want to remember that special day. George asked if he would need to wear his page of honor uniform again. William assured him it was just for that one occasion, though the outfit had been carefully preserved as a historical artifact. George seemed relieved. While he was proud of his role, he was also ready to move forward, to create new experiences beyond that single day. On the actual anniversary, the family attended a small private service of Thanksgiving. It was intimate, just immediate family and close friends, a chance to reflect without the pressure of public performance. King Charles spoke briefly about what the coronation had meant to him, how having his grandchildren participate had made it more meaningful than any crown or ceremony could achieve alone. Later, in private, William raised a glass in toast to his children. He thanked them for their courage, their grace, and their willingness to step into roles they didn't choose, but were learning to embrace. He promised them that he and Kate would always prioritize their well-being over public duty, that they would always have safe space to simply be children. The coronation day had been extraordinary, a moment frozen in history. But for the Wales family, it was also just one day in an ongoing journey. They would face many more public moments, some easier than others. There would be triumphs and mistakes, grace and awkwardness, perfection and beautiful imperfection. What mattered most, they all understood now, wasn't the flawless execution of royal duty. It was the genuine love that bound them together, the support they offered each other, the authentic humanity they brought to their roles. The world had fallen in love with them not because they were perfect, but because they were real. As they left the anniversary service, walking together as a family, photographers captured one final image. George and Charlotte walked slightly ahead, talking animatedly about something only they found hilarious. Louis skipped between his parents, holding both their hands, his joy uninhibited. William and Kate walked with arms linked, watching their children with expressions of unmistakable love and pride. This image, like the coronation photos before it, would circulate widely. But its message was different from the formality of that ceremonial day. This image said that beyond the crowns and the duties, beyond the palaces and the protocols, they were simply a family facing extraordinary circumstances with ordinary love, and that was perhaps the most royal thing about them, of